Take picture. Pause recorded. Face centered. Speech off.
Well, greetings, everyone. This is your friend, Pastor Mark, back with you. I apologize. It's been a while since we've done any more of the hiding place, but first we had company and then sorting out some things about the children going back to school, and it just brought about a bit of a delay. So what we're going to do is conclude the hiding place today. This is chapters 35 through 37. Now, we've already had chapter 35, but I thought since it's been so long since I've posted an update, it kind of made sense to put chapters 35 and 36 together in case you need just a little bit of review. So if not, if you remember well what happened in chapter 35, just skip forward about 10 or 15 minutes and you should be about right for starting chapter 36, which you have not heard yet on this channel. Otherwise, if you want a little bit of review and then carry on, just listen from where you are, and we'll begin now with chapters 35 through 37, which is the final chapter. Let's get started.
From the studios of the Bible Broadcasting Network, we present Christian Classics, reading from a book that has influenced the lives of many people. Our narrator is Lynn Brooks.
Today we'll be reading from The Hiding Place. One drizzly, raw afternoon, when just enough light came through the window to read by, I came to Paul's account of his thorn in the flesh. 3 times, he said, he had begged God to take away his weakness, whatever it was, and each time God had said, "Rely on me." At last, Paul concluded, the words seemed to leap from the page, that his very weakness was something to give thanks for, because now Paul knew that none of the wonders and miracles which followed his ministry could be due to his own virtues. It was all Christ's strength, never Paul's. And there it was. The truth blazed like sunlight in the shadows of Barracks 28. The real sin I had been committing was not that of inching toward the center of a platoon because I was cold. The real sin lay in thinking that any power to help and transform came from me. Of course, it was not my wholeness, but Christ's that made the difference. The short winter day was fading. I could no longer separate the words on the page, and so I closed the Bible, and to that group of women clustering close, I told the truth about myself, my self-centeredness, my stinginess, my lack of love. That night, real joy returned to my worship. Each roll call, the wind seemed sharper. Whenever she could, Meehan smuggled newspapers from the staff room at the hospital, which we placed inside our clothes. Nolly's blue sweater beneath Betsy's dress was black with newsprint. The cold seemed to be affecting Betsy's legs. Sometimes in the morning she could not move them at all, and 2 of us would have to carry her between us. It was not hard. She weighed no more than a child, but she could no longer stamp her feet as the rest of us did to keep the blood flowing. When we returned to the dormitory, I would rub her feet and hands, but my own only picked up the chill from hers. It was the week before Christmas that Betsy woke up, unable to move either legs or arms. I shoved my way through the crowded aisles to the center room. The snake was on duty. "Please, Betsy is ill. Oh, please, she's got to get to the hospital." "Stand at attention. State your number." "Prisoner 66730 reporting. Please, my sister is sick." "All prisoners must report for the count. If she's sick, she can register at sick call." A Dutch woman, on the tier above ours, helped me form a cradle with our arms and carry Betsy outside. The rhythmic stamping had already begun in the Lagerstrasse. We carried her to the hospital, then stopped. In the light of the street lamps, the sick call line stretched to the edge of the building and out of sight around the corner. In the sooty snow alongside, 3 bodies lay where they had fallen. Without a word, we turned and carried our load back to the Lagerstrasse. After roll call, we got her back into bed. Her speech was slow and blurred, but she was trying to say something. A camp, Corey. A concentration camp. But we're in charge. I had to bend very close to hear. The camp was in Germany. It was no longer a prison, but a home, where people who had been warped by this philosophy of hate and force could come to learn another way. There were no walls, no barbed wire, and the barracks had window boxes. It will be so good for them, watching things grow. People can learn to love from flowers. I knew by now which people she meant. The German people. I thought of the snake standing in the barracks door that morning. State your number. All prisoners must report for the count. I looked into Betsy's shrunken face. We are to have this camp in Germany instead, Betsy? Instead of the big house in Holland? Oh, no. She seemed shocked. You know we have the house first. It's ready and waiting for us. Such tall, tall windows. The sun is streaming in. A coughing fit seized her when finally she lay still. A stain of blood blackened the straw. She dozed fitfully during the day and night that followed, waking several times with the excitement of some new detail about our work in Holland or Germany. The barracks are gray, Corey, but we'll paint them green. Bright, light green, like springtime. We'll be together, Betsy. We're doing all this together. You're sure about that? Always together, Corey. You and I. Always together. When the siren blew next morning, we carried Betsy again from the dormitory. The snake was standing at the street door. As we started through it with our fragile burden, she stepped in front of us. Take her back to the bunks. I thought, take her back. Wonderingly, we replaced Betsy on the bed. Sleet rattled against the windows. Was it possible that the atmosphere of Barracks 28 had affected even this cruel guard? As soon as roll call was dismissed, I ran back to the dormitory. There, beside our bed, stood the snake. Beside her, 2 orderlies from the hospital were setting down a stretcher. The snake straightened almost guiltily as I approached. Prisoners ready for transfer, she snapped. I looked at the woman more closely. Had she risked fleas and lice to spare Betsy the sick call line? She did not stop me as I started after the stretcher. Our group of knitters was just entering the big room. As we passed, a Polish friend dropped to her knees and made the sign of the cross. Sleet stung us as we reached the outside. I stepped close to the stretcher to form a shield for Betsy. We walked past the waiting line of sick people, through the door and into a large ward. They placed the stretcher on the floor, and I leaned down to make out Betsy's words. Must tell people what we have learned here. We must tell them that there is no pit, though deep, that he is not deeper still. They will listen to us, Corey, because we have been here. I stared at her wasted form. But when will all this happen, Betsy? Now. Right away. Oh, very soon. By the 1st of the year, Corey. We will be out of prison. A nurse had caught sight of me. I backed to the door of the room and watched as they placed Betsy on a narrow cot close to the window. I ran around to the outside of the building. At last, Betsy caught sight of me. We exchanged smiles and soundless words until one of the camp police shouted at me to move along. About noontime, I put down my knitting and went out to the center room. Prisoner 66730 reporting. Request permission to visit the hospital. I stood ramrod straight. The snake glanced up, then scrawled out a pass. Outside, it was still sleeting. I reached the door of the ward, but the horrible nurse would not let me enter, even with my pass. So I went again to the window next to Betsy's cot. I waited until the nurse left the room, then tapped gently. Betsy's eyes opened. Slowly, she turned her head. "Are you all right?" I formed with my lips. She nodded. "You must get a good rest," I went on. She moved her lips in reply, but I could not follow. She formed the words again. I bent my head to one side, level with hers. The blue lips opened again. "So much work to do." The snake was off duty during the afternoon and evening, and though I asked the other guards repeatedly, I did not again get permission to leave. The minute roll call was dismissed the following morning, I headed for the hospital, permission or no. I reached the window and cupped my eyes to peer in. A nurse was standing directly between me and Betsy. I ducked out of sight, waited a minute, then looked again. A second nurse had joined the first, both now standing where I wanted to see. They stepped to the head and foot of the bed. I gazed curiously at what lay on it. It was a carving in old yellow ivory. There was no clothing on the figure. I could see each ivory rib and the outline of the teeth through the parchment cheeks. It took me a moment to realize it was Betsy. The nurses had each seized 2 corners of the sheet. They lifted it between them and carried the bundle from the room before my heart had started to beat again in my chest. Betsy! But, she had too much to do. She could not... Where were they taking her? Where had they gone? I turned from the window and began running along the side of the building, chest hurting me as I breathed. Then I remembered the washroom, that window at the rear. That was where... My feet carried me mechanically around to the back of the building, and there, with my hand on the windowsill, I stopped. Suppose she was there. Suppose they had laid Betsy on that floor. I started walking again. I walked for a long time, still with that pain in my chest, and each time my feet took me back to the washroom window. I would not go in. I would not look. Betsy could not be there. I walked some more. Strangely enough, although I passed several camp police, no one stopped or questioned me. "Corey!" I turned around to see Meehan running after me. "Corey, I've looked for you everywhere. Oh, Corey, come!" She seized my arm and drew me toward the back of the hospital. When I saw where she was headed, I wrenched my arm free. "I know, Meehan. I know already." She didn't seem to hear. She seized me again, led me to the washroom window, and pushed me in ahead of her. In the reeking room stood a nurse. I drew back in alarm, but Meehan was behind me. "This is the sister," Meehan said to the nurse. I turned my head to the side. I would not look at the bodies that lined the far wall. Meehan put an arm around my shoulder and drew me across the room till we were standing above that heartbreaking row. "Corey, do you see her?" I raised my eyes to Betsy's face. "Lord Jesus, what have you done? Oh, Lord, what are you saying? What are you giving me?" For there lay Betsy, her eyes closed as if in sleep, her face full and young. The care lines, the grief lines, the deep hollows of hunger and disease were simply gone. In front of me was the Betsy of Harlem, happy and at peace, stronger, freer. This was the Betsy of heaven, bursting with joy and health. Even her hair was graciously in place, as if an angel had ministered to her. At last, I turned wonderingly to Meehan. The nurse went silently to the door and opened it for us herself. "You can leave through the hall," she said softly. I looked once more at the radiant face of my sister. Then Meehan and I left the room together. A pile of clothes was heaped outside in the hallway. On top lay Nolly's blue sweater. I stooped to pick it up. The sweater was threadbare and stained with newsprint, but it was a tangible link with Betsy. Meehan seized my arm. "Don't touch those things. Black lice, they'll all be burned." And so I left behind the last physical tie. It was just as well. It was better. Now what tied me to Betsy was the hope of heaven. Today on Christian Classics, we have been reading from The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom with John and Elizabeth Sherrill, published by the Fleming H. Revelco.
You've been listening to Christian Classics, narrated by Lynn Brooks. This has been a production of the Bible Broadcasting Network.
Now, more from The Hiding Place from Thursday, February 12th, 2026.
From the studios of the Bible Broadcasting Network, we present Christian Classics, reading from a book that has influenced the lives of many people. Our narrator is Lynn Brooks.
Today we'll be reading chapter 36 from The Hiding Place. The beauty of Betsy's face sustained me over the next days as I went from one to another of the women who had loved her, describing to them her peace and her joy. 2 mornings after her death, the count was off at roll call. The other barracks were dismissed. 28 remained in ranks, eyes front. The loudspeaker beeped, and a voice came on. A woman was missing. The entire barracks would stand on the Lagerstrasse until she was found. Left, right, endlessly tramping to drive the chill from weary legs. The sun came up, a wan, wintry sun that did not warm. I looked down at my feet. My legs and ankles were swelling grotesquely. By noontime, there was no feeling in them. Betsy, how happy you are today. No cold, no hunger, nothing between you and the face of Jesus. The dismissal order came in the afternoon. We learned later that the missing woman had been found dead on one of the upper platforms. It was the following morning when, over the loudspeaker during roll call, came the words, "Ten Boom, Cornelia." For an instant, I stood stupidly where I was. I had been prisoner 66730 for so long that I almost failed to react to my name. I walked forward. Stand to the side. What was going to happen? Why had I been singled out? Had someone reported the Bible? The roll call dragged on. From where I stood, I could see almost the entire Lagerstrasse, tens of thousands of women stretching out of sight, their breath hanging white in the night air. The siren blew for dismissal. The guard signaled me to follow her. I splashed through the slush, trying to keep up with the strides of her tall boots. My legs and feet were still painfully swollen from the long count the day before. My shoes were held together with bits of string. I hobbled behind the guard into the administration barracks at the opposite end of the Lagerstrasse from the hospital. Several prisoners were standing in line at a large desk. An officer seated behind it stamped a paper and handed it to the woman in front of him. "Released," he said. Released? Was the woman free then? Were we all... He called a name and another prisoner stepped to the desk. A signature, a stamp, released. At last, Ten Boom Cornelia was called. I stepped to the desk, steadying myself against it. He wrote, brought down the stamp, and then I was holding it in my hand. A piece of paper with my name and birth date on it, and across the top in large black letters, Certificate of Discharge. Dazed, I followed the others through a door at our left. There, at another desk, I was handed a railway pass entitling me to transportation through Germany to the Dutch border. Outside this office, a guard pointed me down a corridor into still another room. There, the prisoners who had been ahead of me were tugging their dresses over their heads and lining up against the rear wall. Clothing over here, a smiling prison trustee told me. Released physical, she explained. I drew the Bible over my head along with the dress, rolled them together, and buried the bundle at the bottom of the clothing pile. I joined the others, the wooden wall rough against my bare back. Strange how the very word release had made the procedures of prison 100 times more hateful. How often Betsy and I had stood like this. But the thought of freedom had stirred in me, and the shame of this inspection was greater than all the others. At last, the doctor arrived, a freckle-faced boy in a military uniform. He glanced along the lineup with undisguised contempt. One by one we had to bend, turn around, spread our fingers. When he reached me, his eyes traveled down to my feet, and his lips puckered in disgust. Edema, hospital. He was gone. With one other woman who had not passed, I scrambled back into my clothes and followed the trustee from the building. Day had broken, a sullen gray sky spitting snow. We started up the Lagerstrasse past the endless streets of barracks. Then, aren't we to be released? I imagine you will be as soon as the swelling in your legs goes down, the trustee said. They only release you if you're in good condition. I saw her look at the other prisoner. The woman's skin and eyes were a dull, dark yellow. Sick calls stretched around the side of the hospital, but we walked straight through the door and into a ward at the rear. The room was crammed with double-decker cots. I was assigned a place on an upper bunk next to a woman whose body was covered with erupting pustules. But at least it was near a wall where I could keep my swollen legs elevated. That was what mattered now, to get the swelling down, to pass the inspection. Whether that ray of freedom shed a new, relentless light on Ravensbrück, or whether this was truly the most savage place yet, I could not tell. The suffering was unimaginable. Around me were survivors of a prison train which had been bombed on its way here. The women were horribly mutilated and in terrible pain. But at each moan, 2 of the nurses jeered and mimicked the sounds. Even in the other patients, I saw that stony indifference to others that was the most fatal disease of the concentration camp. I felt it spread to myself. How could one survive if one kept on feeling? The paralyzed and the unconscious kept falling out of the crowded, narrow cots. That first night, 4 women fell from upper bunks and died on the floor. It was better to narrow the mind to one's own need, not to see, not to think. But there was no way to shut out the sounds. All night, women cried out a German word I didn't know, over and over from rasping throats. Finally, I realized that they were calling for bedpans. It was out of the question for most of the women in this room to make it to that filthy latrine next door. At last, reluctant to lower my legs, I climbed down from my cot and set about the chore. The gratitude of the patients was heart-wrenching. Who are you? Why are you doing this? As though cruelty and callousness were the norm, ordinary decency the marvel. As a wintry dawn crept through the windows, I realized it was Christmas Day. I went each morning to the clinic at the front of the hospital where I could hear the tramping of feet on the Lagerstrasse outside. Each time the verdict was edema of the feet and ankles. Many of those who attended the clinic were, like myself, discharged prisoners. Some had been released months ago. The discharge papers and railway passes were ragged from opening and refolding, and what if Betsy were still alive? Surely our prison term would have been up together. But Betsy would never have passed the physical. What if she were here with me? What if I were to pass the inspection and she... There are no ifs in God's kingdom. I could hear her soft voice saying it. His timing is perfect. His will is our hiding place. Lord Jesus, keep me in your will. Don't let me go mad by poking about outside it. I kept looking for someone to give the Bible to. How easy it would be, back in Holland, to get another, 100 others. There were not many Hollanders in the ward who would be able to read the Dutch text, but at last I slipped it around the neck of a grateful young woman. The 6th night I spent in the ward, both bedpans were suddenly and mysteriously missing. In an upper bunk on the center aisle were 2 Hungarian gypsies, whose muttering was part of the babble of the room. I never walked past their cot because one of them had a gangrenous foot which she would thrust in the face of anyone who came near. Now, someone screamed out that the gypsies had the bedpans hidden under their blankets to save them the trip to the toilets. I went to their cot and pleaded with them, though I didn't know whether they understood German or not. Suddenly in the dark, something wet and sticky coiled around my face. The woman had taken the bandage from her foot and flung it at me. I ran sobbing down the corridor and washed beneath the wall spigot in the latrine. I would never step into that aisle again. What did I care about the wretched bedpans? I couldn't bear... But of course I did go back. I had learned much in the past year about what I could and could not bear. As the gypsies saw me heading down the aisle toward them, both bedpans clattered onto the floor. The next morning, the doctor on duty at the clinic stamped the medical approval on my discharge form. Events that had dragged so slow now moved with bewildering speed. In a dressing shed near the outer gate of the camp, I was outfitted with clothes. Underthings, a woolen skirt, a truly beautiful silk blouse, sturdy, almost new shoes, a hat, and overcoat. I was handed a form to sign stating that I had never been ill at Ravensbrück, never had an accident, and that the treatment had been good. I signed. In another building, I received a day's bread ration and food coupons for 3 additional days. I was also given back my watch, my Dutch money, and Mama's ring. And then I was standing with a group of 10 or 12 just inside the gate. The heavy iron doors swung open. At the heels of a woman guard, we marched through. We climbed a little hill. Now I could see the lake frozen from shore to shore. The pines and the distant church steeple sparkled in the winter sun like an old-fashioned Christmas card. I could not believe it. Perhaps we were only going to the Siemens factory. Tonight we would march back to camp. But at the top of the hill we turned left, toward the center of the small town. I could feel my feet swelling in the tight new shoes, but I bit my lip and made myself stride along. I imagined the guard turning around, pointing a scornful finger. Edema, send her back to camp. At the small train station, the guard turned and left us without a backward glance. Apparently, we were all traveling as far as Berlin, then each pursuing her separate route home. There was a long wait on cold iron benches. The feeling of unreality persisted. Only one thing seemed familiar, the hungry hollow in my stomach. I put off getting into my bread allowance as long as I could, but at last reached into my overcoat pocket. The packet was gone. I sprang up from the bench, looking beneath it, retracing my steps to the station. Whether I had dropped it or it had been stolen, the bread was gone, and with it the ration coupons. At last, a train pulled into the station, and we crowded eagerly to it, but it was for military personnel only. Late in the afternoon, we were allowed aboard a mail train, only to be put off 2 stops farther on to make room for a food shipment. The trip became a blur. We reached the huge, bomb-gutted terminal in Berlin sometime after midnight. It was New Year's Day, 1945. Betsy had been right. She and I were out of prison. Today on Christian Classics, we have been reading from The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom with John and Elizabeth Sherrill, published by the Fleming H. Revell Company.
You've been listening to Christian Classics, narrated by Lynn Brooks. This has been a production of the Bible Broadcasting Network.
And now from Friday, February 13th, 2026.
From the studios of the Bible Broadcasting Network, we present Christian Classics, reading from a book that has influenced the lives of many people. Our narrator is Lynn Brooks.
Today we'll be reading the final chapter from The Hiding Place. Snow drifted down from a shattered skylight as I wandered, confused and frightened through the cavernous station. I knew that I must find the train to Ulsan, but months of being told what to do had left me robbed of initiative. At last, someone directed me to a distant platform. A train was standing on the track, and I climbed aboard. It was hours before anyone else arrived, but I did not dare get off for fear I would not find my way back again. By the time the train started up, I was dizzy for lack of food. At the first stop outside Berlin, I followed the other passengers into the station cafe. I showed the woman behind the cash box my Dutch guilders and told her I had lost my coupons. "That's an old story. Get out of here before I call the police." The trip was endless. Many miles of track could be traveled only at a crawl. Some sections were gone altogether, and there were interminable, long detours and many changes of train. Often we did not stop as fear of trades. It exchanged freight and passengers in the countryside. And all the while, out my window passed once beautiful Germany. Fire-blackened woods, the gaunt ribs of a church standing over a ruined village. Bremen especially brought tears to my eyes. In all that wasteland, I saw one human being, an old woman, poking at a heap of bricks. In Ulsan, there was a long wait between trains. It was late at night. The station was deserted. As I dozed in an empty coffee bar, my head dropped forward until it rested on the small table in front of me. A blow on my ear sent me sprawling almost to the floor. "This is not a bedroom," the furious station agent shrieked. "You can't use our tables to sleep on." Trains came. Trains didn't come. I climbed on and off. And then I was standing in a line at a customs shed. As I left the building, a workman in a blue cap and blue overalls stepped up to me. "Here, you won't get far on those legs. Hang on to my arm." He spoke Dutch. I clung to him and hobbled across some tracks to where another train was waiting, engine already puffing smoke. I was in Holland. The train was going only as far as Groningen, a Dutch city not far from the border. Beyond that, rails were torn up and all except government travel banned. With the last of my strength, I limped to a hospital near the station. A nurse, in a sparkling white uniform, invited me into a little office. When I had told my story, she left the room. In a few minutes, she was back with a tray of tea and rusk. "I left the butter off. You're suffering from malnutrition. You must be careful what you eat." Tears tumbled into the hot tea as I drank. Here was someone who felt concerned for me. There were no available beds in the hospital, she said, but one of the staff was away, and I was to have her room. Right now I have a hot tub running. I followed her down gleaming corridors in a kind of happy dream. In a large bathroom, clouds of steam were rising from a glistening white tub. Nothing in my life ever felt as good as that warm bath. I lay submerged to my chin, feeling the water soothe my scab-crusted skin. Just 5 minutes more, I would beg each time the nurse rapped at the door. At last, I let her hand me a nightgown and lead me to a room where a bed was turned down and waiting. Sheets. White sheets, top and bottom. I could not get enough of running my hands over them. The nurse was tucking a second pillow beneath my swollen feet. I struggled to stay awake. To lie here clean and cared for was such joy I did not want to sleep through a minute of it. I stayed in the hospital at Groningen 10 days, feeling my strength return. For most meals, I joined the nurses in their own dining room. The first time I saw the long table set with silverware and glasses, I drew back in alarm. "You're having a party. Let me take a tray to my room." I did not feel ready yet for laughter and social chatter. The young woman beside me laughed as she pulled out a chair for me. "It's not a party, it's just supper, and skimpy enough at that." The ache in my heart was to get to Willem and Nolly. But how could it be done with the travel ban? Telephone service, too, was more limited than ever, but at last, the girl at the hospital switchboard reached the telephone operator in Hilversum with the news of Betsy's death and my release. In the middle of the second week, hospital authorities arranged a ride for me on a food truck headed south. We made the illegal trip at night and without headlights. The food had been diverted from a shipment headed for Germany. In the gray early morning, the truck pulled up to Willem's big brick nursing home. A tall, broad-shouldered girl answered my knock, and then went dashing down the hallway with the news that I was here. In a moment, my arms were around Tyne and two of my nieces. Willem arrived more slowly, limping down the corridor with the help of a cane. We held each other a long time while I told them the details of Betsy's illness and death. "Almost," said Willem slowly. "Almost I could wish to have the same news of Kik. It would be good for him to be with Betsy and Father." They had had no word of this tall, blond son since his deportation to Germany. I remembered his hand on my shoulder, guiding me on our bicycles through the blacked-out streets to Pickwick's. I spent 2 weeks in Hilversum trying to adjust to what my eyes had told me that first moment. Willem was dying. Only he seemed unaware of it as he hobbled along the halls of his home, bringing comfort and counsel to the sick people in his care. They had over 50 patients at the moment, but what I could not get over was the number of young women in help, nurses' aides, kitchen helpers, secretaries. It was several days before I perceived that most of these girls were young men in hiding from the forced labor conscription, which had grown more ruthless than ever. And still, something in me could not rest until I got back to Haarlem. Nolly was there, of course, but it was the Beyer, too, something in the house itself that called me, beckoned me, told me to come home. The problem again was getting there. Willem had the use of an official car for nursing home business, but only within a radius of Hilversum. Finally, after many relayed phone calls, he told me the trip had been arranged. The roads were deserted as we set out. We passed only 2 other cars all the way to the rendezvous spot with the car from Haarlem. Ahead, pulled off into the snow at the side of the road, we saw it. A long, black limousine with official government plates and curtained rear windows. I kissed Willem goodbye and then stepped quickly, as instructed, into the rear of the limousine. Even in the curtained gloom, the ungainly bulk beside me was unmistakable. Herman," I cried. "My dear Cornelia." His great hand closed around both of mine. "God permits me to see you again." He seemed as well informed as ever about everything that went on in Haarlem, and as the uniformed driver sped us along the empty roads, he filled me in on all the details I ached to know. All of our Jews were safe except for Mary Atali, who had been sent to Poland following her arrest in the street. Our group was still operating, although many of the young men were in hiding. He warned me to expect changes at the Beyer. After the police guard had been removed, a series of homeless families had been housed there, although at the moment he believed the living quarters above the shop were empty. Even before the house was unsealed, loyal twos had returned from Scheveningen and reopened the watch business. Mr. Buchers, the optician next door, had given her space in his shop from which she had taken orders to give to our repairmen in their homes. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I made out my friend's face more clearly. There was perhaps an extra knob or two on the misshapen head. Teeth were missing. But to that vast, kindly ugliness, the beating had made no real difference at all. Now the limousine was threading the narrow streets of Haarlem, over the bridge on the Sparn, across the Grote Markt in the shadow of St. Bavo's, into the street. I was out of the car almost before it stopped, running down the alley, through the side door, and into Nolly's embrace. She and her girls had been there all morning, sweeping, washing windows, airing sheets for my homecoming. Over Nolly's shoulder I saw twos, standing in the rear door to the shop, laughing and sobbing both at once. Laughing because I was home, crying because Father and Betsy, the only two people she had ever allowed herself to love, would never be. And yet, in a strange way, I was not home. I was still waiting, still looking for something. I was home, I was working and busy. Or was I? And then one day, as I stepped into the alley, I knew what it was I was looking for. It was Betsy. It was Betsy I had missed every moment of every day since I ran to the hospital window and found that she had left Ravensbrück forever. It was Betsy I had thought to find back here in Haarlem, here in the watch shop and in the home she loved. But she was not here. And now, for the first time since her death, I remembered. We must tell people, Corey. We must tell them what we learned. That very week, I began to speak. If this was God's new work for me, then he would provide the courage and the words. Through the streets and suburbs of Haarlem, I bumped on my bicycle rims, bringing the message that joy runs deeper than despair. It was news that people needed to hear that cheerless spring of 1945. No Bride of Haarlem tree filled the air with fragrance. Only the stump had been too big to haul off for firewood. No tulips turned fields into carpets of color. The bulbs had all been eaten. No family was without its tragedy. In churches and club rooms and private homes in those desperate days, I told the truths Betsy and I had learned in Ravensbrück. And always at these meetings I spoke of Betsy's first vision, of a home here in Holland where those who had been hurt could learn to live again unafraid. At the close of one of these talks, a slender, aristocratic lady came up to me. I knew her by sight, Mrs. Behrens de Haan, whose home in the suburb of Bloemendaal was said to be one of the most beautiful in Holland. I had never seen it, only the trees at the edge of the huge park in which it was set. And so I was astonished when this elegantly dressed lady asked me if I were still living in the ancient little house, the Beje. How did you... Yes, I do, but I am a widow, Mrs. Beers de Haan was saying, but I have 5 sons in the resistance. 4 are still alive and well. The 5th we have not heard from since he was taken to Germany. As you spoke just now, something in me kept saying, Jan will come back, and in gratitude you will open your home for this vision of Betsy ten Boom. It was 2 weeks later that a small boy delivered a scented envelope to the side door. Inside, in slanted purple letters, was a single line. Jan is home. And so Betsy's dream home in Holland was opened. After Holland, I traveled to Germany, where the most pressing need was homes. 9 million people were said to be without them. How could I speak to these people of the reality of God and then go back to my quiet room in the church hostel outside the city? No, before I could bring a message to them, I would have to live among them. And it was during the months that I spent in the factory that a director of a relief organization came to see me. They had heard of my rehabilitation work in Holland, he said, and they wondered. I was opening my mouth to say that I had no professional training in such things, when his next words silenced me. We've located a place for the work. It was a former concentration camp that's just been released by the government. We drove to Darmstadt to look over the camp. Rolls of rusting barbed wire still surrounded it. I walked slowly up a cinder path between drab gray barracks. I pushed open a creaking door. I stepped between rows of metal cots. Window boxes. We'll have them at every window. The barbed wire must come down, of course, and then we'll need paint. Green paint. Bright yellow green. The color of things coming up new in the spring. Today on Christian Classics, we have completed the reading of The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom with John and Elizabeth Sherrill, published by the Fleming H. Revell Company.
You've been listening to Christian Classics, narrated by Lynn Brooks. This has been a production of the Bible Broadcasting Network.
And so we have concluded The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom with John and Elizabeth Sherrill. I trust it was a blessing to your heart, and what a reminder of God's love, God's intervention, strength that can only be given from the Lord. And as the picture was painted of the loveliness, the free of care that was on Betsy's face once she slipped into glory, I couldn't help but remember the verse that says that the death of the saints are precious in the sight of our Lord. Well, let's give thanks to our wonderful Lord for Corrie and her sister Betsy and for the family, and pray that we too might walk in such a way that no matter what we face, we shall shine with the light of God's grace. Father in heaven, we thank you for this story that we have had the privilege of hearing. May we learn from it, and may we find our own hiding place in you, I pray, that we might shine to everyone we meet with the light of your life and love. In Jesus' name, amen. That'll do it. I'll try to put another book on at some point. Until next time, may the Lord bless you, make his face to shine upon you. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.